Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Board of Education Curriculum Committee. We're thrilled to be meeting for the first time since coronavirus hit the United States. Our subject of our meeting this afternoon is remote learning in Port Washington. First of all, I want to apologize in advance if you hear thundering going by me. It's a lot of children doing various different things.
Like me!
Yeah, like her. So I wanted to first talk about the frame of mind that I'd like us to go into this conversation about. Everybody who's watching can hopefully see that we have a real army of administrators and educators on this call to talk about this topic. I wanted to start by telling you a story. So in my first year of law school, in my first day of law school, actually, one of my professors spoke about the benefits of a legal education. And the way he spoke to us was he said, if someone says something to you that offends you or angers you, and you get so angry that you sort of tell them where to shove it and then you walk away, that's the end of the conversation. Nothing's been accomplished. There's no movement forward. And nobody on either side of the dispute has benefited. They're just upset with each other. If instead you engage the person you disagree with and you challenge their assumptions and you ask questions about their position and you advocate for your own, you're now in a position to engage in persuasive argument. And maybe you have a chance to show someone your own point of view and maybe change their mind. And that's the only way to make positive change in the world. My professor was speaking about this in terms of the benefits of a legal education, but really what he was speaking about was the benefits of civil discourse in society. And I've tried to live by these ideas, and I think that message is valuable in life in general. So as we enter this conversation, I want to ask to everyone to try and do the same. We are going to have an open live question and comment session for the community at the end. And I know that there is a spectrum of feelings in the community about the remote learning plan and a lot of frustration on all ends from everybody who's been involved in this remote learning plan. I know we have people who are happy with it. I know we have people who think there's been too much work for their children, too little work for their children, people who think there's been too little contact with teachers, people who think the teachers are doing more than they should be called upon to do. But I want to remind everybody that every single person who is on this call, as well as the parents and community who are watching and who are going to chime in with questions, we are all on the same team here. And I do believe that parents have an absolute right to advocate fiercely for their children, but please be respectful and constructive with your comments and your questions, both to our administrators and educators and to your fellow parents and community members. Let's engage in a real conversation about this issue so we can try to move forward and hopefully design something that works for every child and every educator, since this may be going on for a while. With that said, I really want to profusely thank all of our administrators and educators for being on this call and taking the time to be here. I know you've all been working very, very, very hard lately. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Westerfeld to get into the meat of our conversation.
Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by saying I think I have forgotten what the rest of my home looks like because I'm in the office pretty much all day and all evening and many times into the night, as I'm sure all of you or many of you are doing exactly what I'm doing. I did also want to begin by saying that in throughout my career, I never imagined that as I'm working, and moving toward retirement in another few weeks, that we would be living at a time when absolutely no one could have predicted what the time would look like and what we would all be dealing with. I guess the good news is that we're all in this together and we will all get through it together. I also wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge not only our incredible administrators, our amazing teachers, and all of our wonderful support staff. On March 12th, it literally felt like the rug was swept out from underneath all of us, as we all had to adapt to certainly not just a whole new way of educating, but certainly a whole new way of living. And we're still adapting because there are still many unknowns. And hopefully My wish is that this will be over sooner rather than later for everyone. So I did, again, just want to acknowledge and thank everyone, again, all of our staff for coming together and trying to do the very best that we all can do by our students, who, by the way, we miss terribly. We absolutely miss them. And I had really hoped that we'd be able to see them before the school year ended, and not through a lens, but in person. So having said that, and as I mentioned before, on March 12th, literally the world changed. And at that time, we were aware, or we thought that schools would be closed maybe for a couple of days. At that time, Dr. Hines and the board had made an announcement that schools would be closed on Friday, March 13th, and the following Monday. And so no one really knew at that point what was going to happen moving forward and how long the closures may or may not take place for. Subsequent to that, we were aware that we were going to be closed for 2 weeks. So at that time, there was what we would call, I guess, the phase 1 plan of at-home instruction started to take place. And that really involved more of teachers assigning different tasks, different assignments to children. And it wasn't until, I believe, the beginning of April when we found out we were going to be closed at that point until the beginning to the middle of May. And so at that time, we were working with short periods of time in which we had to figure out, what will this plan look like? What will remote instruction look like? Again, not being aware at that point that we would be closed for the remainder of the school year. So the phase 2 plan, which I just want to remind everyone, phase 2 was not in lieu of phase 1. Phase 2 was in conjunction with phase 1. In the phase 2 plan, we went into more, I guess, synchronous type of teaching and learning. And it was not just assignments given to children, but there was, live instruction, recorded instruction, and many different ways of continuing the best educational plan that we could for our students. And again, we were working with short periods of time. For the most part, it was 2-week increments that we were preparing for while we were waiting for the governor's orders and so forth. We're fortunate enough in Port Washington to have a teacher technology staff developer who just kicked into action immediately. I have to say and give a shout out to our technology department, to Ryan Maloney and his entire team, for the monumental task that they had, not only in ensuring that our students and our staff that needed the technology were provided with it, but also there were issues related to Wi-Fi and internet access and things of that nature. And they literally worked around the clock, morning, noon, and night, to make sure that we were up and running as quickly as we could. And along with that came the professional development that was needed. And I would just like for everyone to keep in mind that this new way of teaching was not something any of us had ever been truly prepared for or educated in. We had done a tremendous amount of professional development prior to the pandemic in the use of technology. And there were different forms of instruction going on, but certainly not to the level of remote instruction that we were now required to be in. From that time to now, our professional developer, Jackie Gilmartin, has offered anywhere from 25 to 30 different professional development sessions. And our teachers and our support staff have all been engaging in that professional development. And excuse me, those sessions are also recorded and archived and made available, so the teachers and support staff can access them at any time for them, to go through, and whether it was a session on Flipgrid or any other, how to manage remote learning. There were so many different topics that were covered and that are still taking place, by the way, and will continue to take place until the very end. So having said all of this, the way that the format for today's meeting is going to work, we have all of our, we have a group of administrators who are a part of this meeting, and also Regina McLean will be speaking from the teacher perspective of our plans. I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to speak so that by the time we get to the Q&A, hopefully most of your questions will have been already addressed, but also to give everybody a bigger picture viewpoint of, of what has been done in the past 2 months that has gotten us to this point. And also, Dr. Hines will also then be speaking about moving forward. There is a chance, we don't know for sure, but I think everybody knows there's a strong likelihood that at least in September, schools will not resume in the traditional fashion, and that we will more than likely still be engaged in remote learning. For how long, we don't know. No one can predict that. But we are preparing for what remote instruction will look like in September. And as is true of any new initiative or new plans, there are growing pains along the way. I do believe very strongly we've done a lot of things incredibly well. And again, I thank everybody. It's been a true collaborative effort and a real team approach. But as is true with anything else, along the way, there are things that you learn. And as we have evolved in this plan, and as our teachers and support staff and our students and parents, thank you very much, parents, for partnering with us. As everyone has evolved and hopefully has become more adept at this new way of teaching and learning, we have been very reflective and honest about the things that have not worked as well, and what we will be doing to make those things better as we move forward. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Hines to see if he has any comments, and then I will introduce each speaker, in advance. Dr. Hines?
Great, thank you, Dr. Westervelt. And I'm not sure, but this may be, I could be wrong, but this might be your last committee meeting, depending on what happens moving forward. And if that's the case, thank you for everything that you've done from a curriculum and instruction standpoint over the years that you've been here, and certainly very much appreciated. And on the other side, not that the baton could actually be passed physically, but we also have Dr. Mioli here as well, who will be assisting as we move forward, and we very much appreciate him being here, really almost in two capacities, in a future capacity, just to see what will take place, what has to take place as we move forward. I actually had the ability to converse with Congressman Suozzi today for, gosh, over an hour and a half about a whole host of things. One of them had to do with what September may look like. I was on a panel with a few of the superintendents in Suffolk County and Nassau County, and I agree with what Dr. Westervelt is saying. When we think about September and what that looks like, it's a very strong likelihood. It'll either be a hybrid, or students may not be here at all, and so we are definitely preparing for either of those scenarios. But the one common denominator is the fact that we need a remote learning plan, and we'll start talking about that in a little bit. I think it's important for the community who's listening right now, and actually for everybody who's listening, that we've been keeping metrics as far as certain things that to show how much is actually happening behind the scenes. It's almost like an iceberg. You only see what the top 10-15%. You don't see what's underneath the water. But over the past week, from last week, over 4,300 live sessions have taken place with Google Meet. That's a pretty robust amount. And again, the one thing that I want to continually focus on, especially as we think about the future, is that connection with our students, with our teachers and students, and what that looks like, what that sounds like, so on and so forth. So I don't want that to get lost in this conversation, which I don't think it will. Over the past 7 days, teachers have generated over 130,000 shared files over the past 7 days. So that's a significant amount of work that's not only being shared, but certainly that's being constructed, that I think is important to understand. And I know Dr. Westervelt talked about the fact, as far as, professional development, since this began, we've offered over 36 courses to our teachers, and on average, between 45 and 50 teachers have been part of those particular sessions, as far as distance learning, remote learning, and how to engage students and how to create lessons. And again, that is an important facet for us to consider, not only now, but again, when we start thinking about September, so we hit the ground running. Now, I know the survey, the parent survey that went out, I guess about a week ago, a little more than a week ago, we have some preliminary information. And so I'm not getting into the details yet, but again, just preliminary information, because again, as Dr. Westervelt said, and I know the board really, as do the administrators, want to know what our parents and community, what they're thinking and feeling. 50% of the student population answered, in an overwhelming majority, although concerned about their child's learning during the pandemic. They thought that their children were engaged and challenged throughout the day. And again, that's a perspective. That's one data point for us to consider. And again, all the information that comes our way, it's to make something that already exists even better as we look to improve. The concern that we heard through the surveys, and again, it just is preliminary information, is as far as structure. And I think that's because of how quickly this all happened. Structure as far as schedules and the such. These are things that we will strongly consider and look at as we move forward. The other thing, it's because it's, and I think we would all agree with this, it's not just the lessons that are generated or the actual, let's say, lesson vis-a-vis through the computer here, where the teacher is teaching a class, but there are social and emotional aspects and components that we really have to consider, and we have to take into account as we're developing our plan moving forward. That is incredibly important, especially the longer our students are not, or our children are not in school, and they are home. These are the things that we have to really, I think, augment, actually, and I know we will, over the summer, and we can talk more about that in the future. The last thing I want to talk about is, when we talk about September, and I know some parents definitely want to hear about what's going to happen over the next X amount of weeks. I've spoken to many parents, and again, I thank you for your time and your consideration, and for your thoughts about what's happening now. I really sincerely mean that. But when we think about, but when we think about what September looks like, equity and access issues, not only for our students, but definitely for our teachers as well. It is incredibly important that we have technology that is the most up-to-date, that is working together, and everybody has the tools that they need and deserve in order to succeed. Because it won't matter what kind of plan that we have in place if there are technology issues. And that affects everybody, and not just the technology itself, but the access as far as Wi-Fi is concerned and everything else. So I can tell you right now, this is something that the board and I are looking at, as far as making sure that problem is solved before September rolls around. There's a lot of consideration as far as what we're going to do, and I just want the community to understand that, because that, again, if there is a checklist of things that we have to look at and focus on, to me, that is, if not the top, it's top 1 or 2 for sure. And the last thing I want to say is, to our parents who are out there, and I know many of us who are actually speaking today are parents who are engaged with their own child or children's remote learning. There is such a variety of what's happening in different school districts, and not to get into particulars about my school district with my children. you know, do I have concerns? I do. You know, I think we all do in many ways, and I think Dr. Westerveld really summed it up very well. It's a continuum. You have, you know, pocket of, you know, either parents or students who think it's too little, and then you have some who think it's too much, and then there's everyone in between. And I can tell you right now, one of the major focal points as we get ready for September is finding a place that is balanced in the middle, and we address all of those concerns as much as we can. But to our teachers who are listening, and to our administrators, and to our parents and students, thank you for just being as patient as you have been. It is very much appreciated, and we hope to see you in September, because we really do miss you. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Westerveld. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Dr. Mioli, I know, has some insights that he would like to offer. So Dr. Mioli?
Thank you, Dr. Westerveld, and thank you, Dr. Hines, for alluding to my already schizophrenic personality. So I guess I'll be wearing two hats during this meeting. But many of you know I've been in the district a long time, and I just want to set the table by saying that, you know, the last couple of times I sat around the table with most of these faces, we were preparing for emergency, but it was a different kind of emergency. We've been spending a lot of the last couple of years putting in cameras, you know, security vestibules, preparing for emergency responses of a different kind. And, you know, in the beginning of March, you know, again, unbeknownst to all of us, we did a pivot, but all of these people have been putting all of those hours into finding, you know, the best ways we can to respond to the situation. So the word that I like to use, you know, when parents have been reaching out to me, obviously at Sousa, in my capacity as principal there, and you know, we've been evolving. My favorite line with my teachers has been, and still continues to be for the most part, nobody knows less than Google Classroom than I do. And so it's not that I'm proud of it, but you know, we never had a chance or the opportunity to use it, especially at the elementary level, in too many ways. So a lot of it was a learning curve, and has been a learning curve for us. And I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind. So I've been very proud of what our staff and our teachers have done at Sousa. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of a middle phase where when I finally got to learn about Google Classroom and get into the remote pieces, and I will also add to Dr. Westerveld's shout out to Ryan Maloney and our whole tech staff. They've really been burning the midnight oil and doing a great job helping us out. We really found ourselves in a situation where most of the emails I was getting was falling into two camps. One was, we're not getting enough live instruction, we're not getting enough materials. And again, don't forget, we left on March, I think it was 12th, thinking we were coming back the following Tuesday. So we didn't have our materials, our teaching materials, our textbooks, any of those things. But we found ourselves in a position where parents were asking us, you know, either to give us more or less. A lot of parents were saying, you know, there's too much coming at us. We have classroom work, we have special work. In some cases, we have support area work. And with the help of a parent at Sousa, who does a lot of remote learning at the college level, we looked at our organization at Sousa, how we were organizing the classroom so that it could be more consistent, so that if you had more than one child and you were going on, you would see similar types of approaches coming through the classrooms. And also working with teachers, veteran teachers, such as me, who had not been in Google Classroom before, and getting them up to speed in those types of things. So we spent a good deal of time just before phase 2 came in, just talking about organization and sharing. And again, it's been a great evolution, a great learning experience. And I feel like we've come a long way with the addition last week of the live piece. Most of my teachers, even those who had not had much experience before, were ahead of that curve. And I feel like we are continuing to evolve in that way. Two things I want to mention. Dr. Hines brought up social and emotional learning. As I think all of you know, one of the bedrock pieces of our teaching at the elementary school has to do with making sure that students are feeling emotionally safe and are happy to come to school. And as you can imagine, that's one of the most difficult things to do when you're not in person. We went, overnight from being a flesh and blood institution to one that was reaching out to kids and trying to just connect with them, which is hard to do even for adults on the internet. And the other thing is equity and access, and I believe both Dr. Westervelt and Dr. Hines brought that up. One of the other things that we spent a lot of hours on, and we still are to some extent, is recognizing and filling gaps. We recognized right away, even in the first 2 weeks when we were focusing on, just trying to get material out to kids, that there were a significant number of kids who did not have access, who did not have devices where they could get materials, who did not have internet access. And we spent a lot of time getting those kids set up. I know that at Sousa, and I'm pretty sure in the other 6 schools, we made sure that we could connect with 100% of our students, so that every single student was able to take advantage of the remote learning. And that was no small feat, and took a lot of time, effort, and material. And so that's just kind of one of my little pieces from my corner of the world at Sousa. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Westervelt.
Thank you, Dr. Miele. Very eloquently said, and I appreciate your insights. Dr. Suzanne, would you like to add anything?
Hi, sure, of course. Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. And just some personal perspectives in all levels of education. My son, who's a sophomore in college, is downstairs in the basement taking a final as we speak. So I'm going to try to keep it down here. But just going from what Dr. Miele said, when he speaks of Sousa, all 5 elementary schools are really following the same plan. And one of the really positive things I just want to share a couple of important points about is the increased level of communications that's been going on, not only throughout the buildings, but throughout the district. Principals, administrators have been able to connect in a way that was always available, but we were never forced to use. We would have principal meetings as often as we can, but it was very hard to get out of buildings. And now we're on principal meetings, the first couple of days, 4, 5, 6 times a day. We're on with all of our administrators. So the lines of communication, beginning with central office and the administrators amongst all elementary schools and within our own buildings, have never been stronger because of the available tools. So all the elementary schools and all the things that are going on at Sousa, while they look differently sometimes in Port Washington, and we treasure that and embrace that, they are all very, very similar. And again, the increased level of communication and our ability to communicate has taught us a lot. And I think once we are back in school, we will see that we could all get on a call really quickly to support one another and to ensure that all the schools and all the students and administrators are always on the same page, which is super important. And that goes along with our teachers too. Teachers are meeting much more frequently than they ever had time or space to. They are on Google Meets like this at all hours of the day, planning and coordinating. And like Dr. Miele said, being asked to recreate an entire curriculum that never was meant to be delivered in this manner. But again, we always like to put a positive spin on it. The teachers, as well as the students, are learning a lot of platforms that when we are back in person, they will be able to incorporate. We used to rely on a time, and we've moved far away from it because we have a lot of Chromebooks, that we would just get into the computer lab to, publish a book or do something like that. But now that we've been, lack of a better word, forced into this space, there's been a lot of positive things and a lot of positive takeaways. We like to call it like unintentional consequences in a good way that's come about. So in that respect, this increased use of technology will come back into the classroom when we get there. And as we move forward, the administrators and the teachers, we've engaged in a lot of conversations how instruction for the fall and moving forward will need to go seamlessly between the school and the home. And that's why we're not really looking at the purchase of textbooks next year. All of our resources really need to be accessible 24/7. And that's a major shift. And that shift does take time and patience. And that is going on. That's been going on since day one. Those are frequent conversations. And like I said, just a couple of points before I pass it on, are 2 points. And as we move towards the fall, I think it's important to enter into a lot of conversations with the parents. You know, parenting is very different when the children are in school or when you're in distance learning. The roles of all of us on the screen who are parents are a lot different, and the partnership is different, and that is respected both ways. And we're going to have more conversations about that, because that's you parents are playing a very different role, and we understand that. The other thing I just wanted to point out too, again, particularly representing our littlest learners of pre-K and kindergarten, first and second, some of those experiences are just so incredibly challenging to be replicating. You know, the quote unquote academic time, while children are always learning, but when I'm talking about some of the academics, when you break it down on those younger grades, you know, you're talking 45 minutes to an hour, because they're getting little snippets at a time. They're getting 20 minutes here, a 20-minute math lesson, a 10-minute writing lesson. And if you put all those times together, you're looking at an hour a day. Now, when they're with us, of course, they're learning all day long, because they're learning just by being in school. They're learning life skills. They're learning how to get along and all these really, really important things. And that's what the challenges are replicating when you go to distance learning. So we appreciate that. We understand that. We're continually trying to engage. Our teachers are trying their best to engage in other ways, but there's a lot of challenges that we continue to learn from and we continue to improve upon, especially at the elementary level. Thank you, Dr. Westervelt.
Thank you, Dr. Suzanne. And I think just to piggyback on some of what Dr. Suzanne has spoken about, in education, like in any other profession, there are behind the scenes work and responsibilities that, you know, take place and have to take place. Not only, you know, faculty meetings, grade level meetings and things of that nature, but even at the central office level, the work that needed to be completed and would have been done in normal times has continued to take place. So beyond the instruction, beyond the actual teaching time, all of the behind the scenes work, whether it's grant work or whether it's providing meals to children, that Mary Callahan and her team and Elaine Fennick, you know, have really done an incredible job with. You know, all of those aspects of education that take place in normal times have continued to take place. And I think that's important for everyone to recognize that we weren't just, you know, fulfilling the teaching and learning responsibilities, but making sure that we continue to fulfill all other responsibilities to keep, you know, to keep the district and the institution going, and you know, to make sure that we're doing everything that needs to be done. Beth Joblin will speak about the middle school perspective. So Beth.
Hi, everybody. So I want to say this has been challenging for everyone. You at home are trying to help educate your children, as well as trying to educate our children, both in home and school. And it's been challenging for all of us, and dealing with families and working through that with families has been a really great learning experience for us, and understanding what the needs of the home are, as well as what we're going through personally. The middle school teachers have been absolutely wonderful in working with me and communicating with me, as well as my assistant principals, on what their plans are and what they're doing in the classrooms. We meet, I'm going to start with our ongoing communication. I know Dr. Suzanne spoke about communication, and the communication at Weber has never been greater. We speak weekly. We have team meetings. My assistant principals are meeting with each team. The directors are meeting with their departments. The departments that don't have directors, where I am meeting with them, and we are meeting weekly to discuss what's going on in their classrooms, how we're communicating with parents, and getting everyone involved in the learning that's happening at Weber Middle School. The other, we also had several faculty meetings since this has began. I've been meeting with my cabinet, which are all my chair people, and as well as my building reps, to make sure that what we're rolling out is being done well, and that the emotional well-being of our students is what is first and foremost on our minds. We've dealt with a lot of issues at Weber with the connection to computers and the internet, and we were working with several of, we've been working with our tech department to make sure that all of our students can connect and have computers. That has been a struggle at Weber. Students started using their cell phones and realized that they can't possibly do the learning through cell phones. So we've had to really work out and figure out with central administrators and central administration to how do we help the students get online and get connected so they can learn in a fair format as everyone else in our district. We've had other issues and other concerning things of there's only one computer in the house, and our students are arguing over who's using the computer at what time. But we've managed to work that all out. I know at Weber, we created a schedule so we don't have overlapping classes. We've tried very hard not to do that. We did a sign up where teachers could sign up and put their times in and when they're learning so that the students don't have to make choices between classes. When there were some conflicts, we addressed them immediately when parents informed us about it, and we were able to fix those concerns. From the beginning, Weber felt that we needed to meet with students twice a week to make sure that they were comfortable with what was going on in the classes and that we were able to meet with them. And we let the teachers decide what best worked for them in how they delivered the information. Our teachers are professionals, they're smart at what they do, and they really know how to deliver information and content to their students. I'm trying to think of other things. Again, I know, I don't remember who said it, but the emotional well-being of students is really important at this time. We've had students that have been really struggling emotionally with the connection to school, not being in school, not seeing friends, and how to manage all this online and feeling lonely. And my counselors and psychologists and social worker have stepped up to the plate and have met with students. They send out weekly reports to kids. Some of my teachers do individual meetings with some students that are really struggling. So we're really trying to meet the needs of everybody and every student at Weber. I don't know if I've hit I think I've hit everything. Thank you, Dr. Westphal.
Thank you. And my hat off to you and all parents who are not only working from home themselves, but are trying to juggle schedules for their own children and the utilization of the technology and just trying to manage all of that. You have my deepest respect. Dr. Pernick will speak about the high school perspective.
Hi, good afternoon. It's good to see everybody. At the risk of being repetitive, I want to echo some of what's been said by Beth and Sherry, and certainly Wafa, you as well, and Dave and Dr. Hines. I'm incredibly proud of where we are right now as compared to where we were the day we walked out of the building on March 12th. So much we've been constantly in the state of discovery about the challenges that exist for our students and for our teachers. We've, as been said before, just having to build everything from scratch, including, the opportunities we could do in school to have a quick meeting about a struggling student requires a lot more orchestration, not only about how do we create that meeting, but then what interventions we could possibly create when we can't have face-to-face necessarily access with students. So I'm very proud of the work the faculty has put in as they have migrated from one platform, classroom learning, face-to-face, to some sort of remote learning. There are immense challenges. Schreiber is a remarkably diverse school. Just to give you an example, we have 77 sections of advanced placement courses that are either in, taking AP exams with their own challenges, or in some version of having completed those exams when instruction and curriculum delivery typically changes at those times. So we've had to figure out what we do there. In addition, at Schreiber, the state decided to cancel Regents exams. I think that was a great decision by the state and appropriate. It then creates additional challenges for teachers and certainly additional challenges for students and for families as to the direction, right? Curriculum has to continue, but we lose what we're aiming at the end. So we have to change and pivot there as well. So those challenges are crystal clear. We have had like what I call little challenges and big challenges. A teacher goes live and everybody in the room has their cameras off. That I would characterize as a little challenge. Another little challenge, I've been told numerous times that students attend class from bed. So again, I characterize those as little challenges because I think everybody is making these adjustments. And what we're trying to do is build it up and say, okay, what should we be doing there? There are different phone calls for us to make to parents' homes, that sort of thing. We work very hard at trying to resolve issues as they arise. I can tell you, much like when we're in school, every single email from a parent about an issue in a classroom, or if they feel like a teacher isn't posting when they're supposed to, every single one gets addressed with the teacher and with the department chairperson. That would be the same as if we were in school. Our interest is in trying to provide the best education we possibly can. We know that there are things like scheduling conflicts. We understand that those exist. We want the teachers to work together to resolve those conflicts as best as they possibly can. And understand that if we're still doing this in September, there'll be a different version of what we're doing. And I say different, just to go back to Dr. Mioli, it'll continue to evolve. I didn't use evolution in our meeting yesterday. I used the staircase. And I don't know what step we're on, but it'll just keep going up one more step or two more steps. So we'll continue to evolve. But overall, I'm really proud of where we are. I'm extremely proud of what the teachers have been able to produce. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fernick. I'm sure there are people watching who may have questions related to how are we or how are we providing instruction for English language learners and also our students with IEPs. So I'm going to give an opportunity to Shirley Shapiro to talk about our English language learners, and then Dr. Stephanie Allen to speak about students with disabilities. Ms. Shapiro? Shirley?
1 second.
Oh, sorry, okay. And here's an example of technology challenges.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, good. I couldn't unmute. I'm so sorry. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Westervelt, for inviting me to the meeting. I wanted to just share some of the things that have been going on with our English language learners. I'd say probably the first 2.5 to 3 weeks, we did and continue to do a lot of outreach for our students. On the daily, we are calling kids. I've called students myself. I've called parents to find out why kids were not logging on. We've luckily had also the help of our bilingual TAs that have been calling families, particularly at Schreiber, the APs and social worker Adriana Najera Pollack. I'm giving her a shout out because she is the one that works with the L's in the high school. We really did a lot of outreach because, as you can understand, this is a very different mode that our students and especially our new entrants were not familiar with. We continue to outreach on a daily basis. Many of you may know or may not know that COVID-19 has hit the Hispanic population hard. And it's been difficult to hear the stories about our families where we'll have children that are participating on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden we see a drop off. And when we contact the family, we find out that one or both of the parents have COVID, and perhaps the teenage child is taking care of them. One of the TAs called a high school parent and noticed she was coughing and not able to breathe. And the parent said, "I'm in the hospital. I have COVID." So our community, and despite all that, we have had students logging on regularly. I give kudos to my ENL teachers who have also been interacting with the students and understanding that these kids are not getting the support, the physical support that we're able to provide in school by standing next to their desks, by taking them in small groups, by pointing on the paper where they have to write and what they have to do. So the teachers have been really outstanding in trying to find ways, even if they're collaborating with each other, collaborating with a TA in Google Classroom, and providing more of a live experience to provide support for the kids. They've also collaborated with mainstream teachers, where the mainstream teacher is doing a live meet and the ENL teacher will collaborate in the Google Classroom, because then the child feels, they're seeing a few familiar adult faces, and the ENL teacher will help those students. So I've been meeting with my staff probably every other week regularly and emailing. My secretary and I have been also remotely setting up to do the home language questionnaires remotely with our L parents for pre-K students coming into K. This has been challenging for the ENL community, but I feel that with the support of my fellow administrators, Dr. Westervelt, Dr. Hines, and of course the Board of Ed, that we've been able to reach out and engage as many children as we possibly can, even despite some of the serious issues our families are having. And I think let me just look at my notes. And that's it. We've been engaging them in the 4 skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We do tend to do a little more live teaching because these children need that interaction. They need the listening and speaking support because that's a big part of ENL. So overall, I'd say that we're doing a good job. It's been tough. And we're trying to plan for September, whatever that looks like. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, for everything that you and your teacher team have done to make sure that the needs of our English language learners on every level, not only the academic, but on every level, are being fulfilled. And also thank you. I'm aware that you had put some simulations together in Spanish that were sent to the families to help them with the remote learning. I know you didn't mention that, but I wanted to acknowledge that and to thank you for taking the time to do that.
Thank you. I forgot. I created a couple of videos to help parents and children learn how to log on to Google Classroom in Spanish. Those are posted on YouTube. Thank you. I forgot about that.
No problem. Thank you. Dr. Allen?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Dr. Westervelt. Thank you for inviting me today. Similar to some of the things that Shirley mentioned and my other colleagues mentioned, I'm amazed by the way the staff has stepped up and really taken on this challenge. Specific to the special education department, these are students that are typical, and teachers that are very accustomed to working directly hands-on with their students in their classrooms. And they went overnight to really setting themselves up to make sure that every student's IEP was met to the greatest extent possible, which has really been probably one of our biggest challenges, as all of the other schedules were falling into place at the middle school, the high school, the elementary level. Our students have these other additional layers that kept getting piled on resource room, OT, PT for some of our students with assistive technology consultation, speech services, and it all kind of had to build on one another. And in that, again, that first week, people were up and running and getting themselves going, connecting with their students. I think one of the most amazing things too is to see how the staff is reaching out more individually and making individual connections with their students when they haven't heard from them. They're making sure they're reaching out, they're touching base, they're calling at the high school and middle school level, they're calling the kids' cell phones directly, like, hey, what's going on? I missed you this week. What can I do to help? They're offering extra time. They're doing whatever they can to make sure that our students are progressing. And again, like everybody else has mentioned, I have pretty much bi-weekly meetings with my department also. I know the other directors are also meeting with their departments on an ongoing basis to make sure that their curricula are also rolling with the students. I think the biggest challenge also, one of the other biggest challenges is that I have to continue, or our staff has to continue planning for next year. We're in the middle of annual reviews. Those kept going. Again, huge shout out to the psychologists. When I first presented the idea to them that we would be doing this way, they were all on board. Let's go, let's get it going, let's get it started. With some minor technology glitches, they're going, they're doing them. We're doing 504 meetings. And we're still making those plans for students in the future in terms of what that's going to look like, what summer school programming is going to look like for students that have extended school year services. I have to thank my secretaries also, because they have been doing such an amazing job also behind the scenes to keep this all going. Without them, I don't know that much of what my department needs would continue to happen. So it's been amazing to watch. Thanks.
Dr. Allen, and a shout out to you. For those who don't know, Dr. Allen has a tremendous, tremendous job. And my gratitude to you and your team, which includes not only the administrators that work with you, and of course your incredible teaching staff, but also the clerical staff. You really have not missed a beat. And just know that we're all very, very grateful, and we recognize all the work that has taken place and will no doubt continue to take place. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And at this time, I would like to give Regina McLean, who's not only one of our esteemed teachers, but also the head of our teachers bargaining unit, an opportunity so she can also provide some insight into the teacher perspective.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
Thank you.
I don't want to repeat some of what has already been said. So I'm just gonna, first I'm just gonna say that the teachers have been working very closely with their building administrators to make this all work. We are still figuring out the best practices for remote learning. You know, in education, we talk about best practices. What are the best practices for reading or math or science or whatever subject it is that you're teaching? And in many ways, I know I personally feel like I am in some ways a first year teacher again. So we have veteran teachers and we have teachers at all different points of their career, but it's like you're figuring out what the best practices are again. What is the best practice in a live meeting? And you try something and it doesn't work. And then what is the best practice in a recording and you try it and it doesn't work? And then we're just constantly evolving and growing and learning. And then we're also just looking for the best way to engage our kids with the new tools that we are using. It's not the same as being in the classroom. It's never going to be the same. Things that we can do so easily in the classroom take just a crazy amount of work remotely. It's slow, it's inefficient. So I wanted to just say that, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective on you know, we've talked a little bit about the balance of the work and the family life. And I know many families at home are struggling this with themselves, that they have their own work conference calls that they have to be on while they're trying to get their kindergartner on a Google Meet. It's the same thing with the teachers. They're trying to juggle their own children's schedules while also trying to schedule their own with their own students. And you can imagine the scheduling of that is just, I want to say, a beast. It's just super challenging. And I also just want to talk a little bit about the live teaching, because I know there's a lot of people who want more of it, and I just want to address it directly. We don't believe that it is this panacea that maybe some people are making it out to be. It's not without its problems. We know there are glitches. We have teachers getting booted out of their Google Meets, and that can be upsetting to young children when their teacher just poof leaves the meeting. We have kids getting booted out of Google Meets, and that can be frustrating for children. There are glitches. There are, like the other day, personally, I had a meeting with my students. They could hear me, but I couldn't hear them, but they could hear each other. So can you imagine maybe the kinds of conversations that were going on that I wasn't even able to figure out? So there's just there's a lot of technical problems with the live meeting. And also we've learned that trying to, the meetings can be good for the connection, but trying to deliver curriculum through a meeting is not one of the best practices. Actually, recorded meetings seem to work better for the teachers and the students. We've had feedback from students who say, I like it because I can pause it. I can go back and rewind it and listen to it again. So there really are some positive things about the recorded instruction that we should recognize. And I just looking back at my notes to see if there's anything else that, I did want to touch upon the engagement piece. A lot of students are able to complete the work that we assign, but they're not able to always show up to the live meeting for whatever reason. They might be sharing technology with their siblings, or their parents. And so they can't show up. So with the things that are asynchronous or recorded, they can go and they can access whenever it's convenient for them and their family. And we've heard from teachers that we have students handing in work very late in the evening and oftentimes after regular school hours. So we know that families at home are juggling with this whole remote learning as well. And then with the students who are not engaging, that are not showing up, we know the social workers and the guidance counselors and the administrators have been doing just a great job of trying to reach out to these kids and try to figure out why they're not engaging. What is the issue? Is it a technical issue? Is it some other issue going on in the home? So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned the social workers and the guidance counselors in that. And then just one last thing, the bandwidth, I just want to touch upon the technology. Even if we have one-to-one devices for everybody, the bandwidth is still an issue. We have members who, I have anecdotal stories, they'll have themselves and 3 other kids who are in the house. They all have devices, but the bandwidth isn't enough and they can't make this technology work. So I think moving forward, we just have to be very conscious of finding a balance between, with the scheduling and with the technology and with what we know is best for children, taking into account screen time as well. That's what we need to be thinking about. And we are continuing to evolve. I don't think that this program that we're doing right now is necessarily the way it would be in the fall if we were to have to do this in the fall. So I really think it's about the balance. And let me just look at my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to say. I think I've said everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before Dr. Hines speaks about moving forward and the plan moving forward, I think I just want to rewind for a little bit. Of course, if any of us had our way, no one would ever wish for this pandemic, of course. But in the darkest times, I always try to find a light. And if the pandemic had happened 7 or 8 years ago, I guess what I'm trying to say is, again, in every situation, I always try to find something positive in it. And there's really not much positive about the pandemic itself. But what I have found a positive in is the fact that if this pandemic had happened 7 or 8 years ago, not only Port Washington, but I think many districts would not have been able to even do the level of remote learning that we have all been able to do now. And so, again, nobody wants the pandemic and we all wish it could go away and go away quickly. But I am happy that we are able to provide the level of remote learning that we have been able to provide, because not only have we as a district evolved, but certainly our technology has evolved. I can't imagine what would have happened 7 or 8 years ago and how we would have been able to manage all of this. So having said that, I would like to give Dr. Hines some time to talk about the plan moving forward.
Definitely. Thank you, Wafa. And I'm trying to be mindful of the time we have left, so I won't take up too much of it, but I think it's important that I want to thank everybody for their different perspectives. I think it's incredibly important for the community and for the board, for that matter, and actually for all of us to hear those different perspectives as far as what's been happening, because we get a 360 view of what it looks like from 30,000 feet down to boots on the ground, with teachers working with their kids. I think that's incredibly important. One of the things moving forward that we will focus on, because again, I think anything that's new, there are some things that we would have to, and that's in any organization, to augment in some ways and to look at is consistency. I think consistency with any rollout, it's important to see what it looks like and to figure out ways to make it more consistent. That is going to be one of the themes moving forward. The other is, I've really been, well, aside from the budget, which is I know has taken up so much of the board's time and a lot of district offices' time, but I've been doing a lot of research as far as trying to find who has the ultimate learning plan. Where is it? And I've been researching this as far as what does it look like? What are the elements that are part of it? Clearly we hear about other school districts, whether it's on Long Island, whether it's in different parts of private schools in New York City or in the Big Five, or maybe in Westchester, wherever it may be. I think one of the common characteristics, though, for some things that seemed, or maybe actually is or was seamless when this took place in March, were school districts that had one-on-one initiatives. Clearly they had things that were in place from a systems standpoint, from a programmatic standpoint, where, when the lights were turned off, they were still able to operate in a different way, for sure, but they already were operating in a different way in some capacity, whether it was a K through 12, one-on-one initiative, or maybe it was more secondary. Who knows? But regardless, I should say, is that when we hear of these plans, that seems to be one of the common threads. And for us as a school district in Port Washington, it's incredibly important as we move forward. We have to, I believe, from a technology standpoint, as I said before, is to look at that consistency factor as far as the machines that we use. And so what a one-on-one initiative would look like is every student would have their own technology or piece of technology, whether it's an iPad at the K through 1 level, or a Chromebook, let's say 2nd through 12th grade. They have their own machine. They have the software and the hardware that is consistent throughout the grade levels and throughout the school district. The other component that's incredibly important, excuse me, is that the teachers have the same technology that the students have. So when they are coordinating lessons and they're integrating with one another, that consistency is there as well. So that is I feel one of the common threads as I've been researching, what is too much one-on-one time? I mean, and screen time. I think Regina just talked about that. Where is that sweet spot? I'm just going to be honest with you, and I may have some people, either A, not agree or be upset by it. I don't want kids on the screen for 6 hours a day. It's not appropriate, and developmentally it's not appropriate, and health-wise, it's just not good for you. But we do have to figure out a way, I think, from an equity and access and a consistency factor but to think about what that instruction will look like. And so more to come on what that will look like. But I can tell you right now, as we are focused on the budget, as we are focused on graduation and making sure that our seniors, are celebrated the best way that we can, to make sure different parts of our school community, as far as our ENL students and our special education students, we say this often as a school district, we are only as good as the most vulnerable school children in our school and what we do to support them. That's incredibly important. But on the other side, for the students who need a little bit more, what can we do for them to support their needs, their wants and needs, and what they deserve? So it's really to take a 360 view as far as what that looks like. And I am very confident when September comes, we will be not only prepared, but we will be ahead of the curve, because everything else I just talked about, I just believe it has to take place. To be honest with you, it's a non-negotiable. It needs to take place. And the reason why it will work is because you just heard for the past, hour or so, the commitment of everybody who's here, and how not only committed they are, but how much they love what they do and how passionate they are. We want to make this work, and I know for a fact that we will. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Westervelt. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. We have some time for questions from the community. I do just want to state that there are a few of us that have a meeting shortly after 4 o'clock. So if we can end at 4 to allow us the time to, to log into our next meeting, I would appreciate it. Rachel, so why don't we begin with the board?
Yeah, I think we should start with the board, but the only thing that I wanted to throw in before we open it up to further questions is that I think a lot of the community is interested to hear about the process behind how this plan was arrived at and the process that will be followed to arrive at a plan for the fall. Can Dr. Hines or Dr. Westervelt, can one of you just talk about that a little bit? And then I do want to open it up to questions.
So Dr. Westervelt, I know that you took the bull by the horns when this was created. Why don't you maybe answer that one, and then I'll answer what the future will look like as far as the committee and such.
Sure. So the plan that was developed in the same manner that we developed, just about everything else. There was a collaborative approach. There was input from stakeholders within the district that included central office, that included building level administration, directors. It also included input from teachers. And again, many of the factors that were mentioned earlier in terms of what's an appropriate amount of screen time, how do not only teachers, but also parents who are working from home and have multiple children, how do they juggle if there's one computer or one or two devices at home, but you have 3 or 4 people that need to use the devices. So all the factors that were mentioned by different people in this meeting, all of that was taken into account. And also, but keep in mind at the time, as we were developing the plans, we were developing them for short periods of time with the hope at the time that we were going to be returning to school, not really knowing until later, I believe in May or early May, that we were going to be closed for the remainder of the school year. So it was not a plan that was developed by me alone. Certainly, the putting the format of the plan together, yes, but in terms of the outcome of the plan, that was a collaborative approach, which is how we do pretty much everything in here in Fort Washington.
So moving forward, and again, part of the research that has taken place as far as, looking at the different components of a successful remote learning plan, it does start with the people who are on board moving forward. And everything that I've read so far consists of having a committee. And so just as we have a re-entry task force committee, which will be starting very, very soon, we will do the same thing for our remote learning plan, to have, again, all stakeholders on board. And I do believe having parents on board is important, but we can't make the committee too large. I mean, so we talk about, you know, the magic number of 15, you know, anything after that. And clearly we would look at subgroups just like we are for the reentry committee, but having all stakeholders on board as we develop this with all different facets of who this impacts, I think is important. And I will say this, and we have to figure out, you know, how to do this. You know, clearly we'll have our teachers on board from different levels, and school board members, and our administrators and such. But to hear the voice of our kids is incredibly important. You know, so how do we have our, you know, our students on board with what this looks like? Because listen, who better to tell us what's working and not working than, you know, the people on the receiving end of this. So hearing their perspective, I think, will be vital, you know, as well as our parents as well. And not that I think, I know this, as we develop this over time, I think we will all become more comfortable, not only with the process, because the process is incredibly important, but as far as what we have come September, I think we will, actually, I know this, we will be very proud of it. And like this plan, it will most likely evolve over time. It won't be static. It won't be just stuck. It's, you know, set in cement. I'm sorry, set in cement. It'll be in sand. And we need to acknowledge that, because as we know, things change at the drop of a dime over the past several months. So we will have that moving forward as well. And so, Rachel, I hope that answers your question from both perspectives.
Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, I think I think the community has felt that this has been a little bit less transparent than I think we try to be, but that was a product of what was happening with the pandemic. You know, it certainly wasn't a purposeful decision. We've all been a little bit cut off from one another because we can't physically be in person. A follow-up to that is, can you just explain to people, you know, with I happen to think the teachers are our most important resource. And so taking something that was meant to be in-person instruction, designing something that's online instead, obviously, you know, Regina spoke about the difficulty of this, and several people have touched on it. I'm sure, as a parent and hearing from community members, we have some fantastic examples, and then we've also learned some things that don't work. Is there also a process in place to practice, to capture what we're learning are the best practices and expand out from there so that teachers can learn from each other as we move forward?
Dr. Russell, you want to start with that, or would you like me to start with that?
Either way. I mean, I'm comfortable either way, whatever you prefer.
All right, so why don't I start with it, and then maybe you can be the closer and end it if you don't mind. So yeah, it's a really important question, Rachel, because, you know, it comes down to what are we learning as this is happening, and to go back to your point initially, you know, if we, not to keep revisiting the past, because I'm sure many of us, you know, we can't change it. But when we do remember what's happening in real time, we are all making the best decisions at that particular moment with what's in front of us. And at another given moment, we are making decisions, and as we said, trying to evolve. And I think the last, I guess, iteration of that would be the addition of, you know, the contact time that took place starting last week. And again, you know, when something like that happens, and I think maybe Sherry said something about unintended consequences, there are positive ones and there are negative ones. So when we look at how do we learn from this particular process, I will say that the parent survey is going to be incredibly useful, but we also have to hear from our teachers as far as what's helped, what's working, what's not working, and to hear from our administrators, and to take all those different pieces of information and then utilize that, and then have this task force committee, you know, have that information in front of them so we can move forward. But in all of this, though, because the process, as I said before, will be just as important as far as whatever the plan actually is. And the only thing we can do to get better is to learn from the past. And I think we will, actually, I know we'll have mechanisms in place in order to do that. So Waf, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So, of course, one of the many added benefits of doing in-person teaching, right, the live teaching, is we all of the administrators, we have an opportunity to go into classrooms and do observations of teachers instructing, both formally and informally. And I've always said that's always been the favorite part of my job, is watching teachers do what they do best. Of course, now we're living in different times, but I am aware we have both principals and directors who have logged into some teachers' Google Classroom and have been able to observe them from that lens. I'm sure it hasn't happened to the same level that it happened in the past when we were able to walk into, any classroom and be able to identify best practices. But the principals are in constant communications with their staff, with their teachers. Oftentimes, unfortunately, when we get a communication, it's usually from a parent. Many times it's a communication about what isn't working, right? So that kind of data is oftentimes easier to gather. However, through the principals in communications and meetings with their teachers and hearing whether they've logged into a classroom or not, they're in communications in terms of, what are the challenges that you're facing? What are some lessons that you've done that have worked incredibly well? And giving teachers really an opportunity to share what has worked incredibly well and what are some things they've learned and have modified lessons accordingly to make the lessons that much better. But we also have a mechanism. I co-chair a staff development committee for the district. It's co-chaired by me and one of our teachers. And prior to the pandemic, we were meeting every month. And much of the conversation that happens at those meetings is we elicit feedback on professional development activities, but also we talk about where are the best practices. So, for example, if we're looking at differentiation, let's say, oftentimes the committee, and which is comprised of both teachers and administrators, bring back feedback. And there are principals on that committee where, somebody will share, so-and-so is doing such an incredible job with differentiation. And we may tap into that person. So there are mechanisms. And I think in this remote age and time, I think much of it really happens at the building level with the principals, but also through the directors. I mentioned earlier when I talked about professional development that I kind of focused on the technology professional development. One of the things I did not mention is, you're all aware that we've had a literacy consultant that has been working with our teachers on process writing. We have continued that professional development as well, but doing it remotely. And so, those are part of the best practices that we want to continue. But it's really, again, it's really through the communications with the principals and through the virtual observation, if you want to call it that.
Thank you. I believe Mrs. Brooks has a question.
Thank you, Rachel. A lot of my questions were answered. I was going to ask, first I want to say that unfortunately the public doesn't always get to see what happens behind the scenes when we switch wheelhouses and we have to change our living rooms into classrooms, literally. And I've been talking to peers and I said, well, this is a lot like homeschooling. And they said, well, actually it's not, because we can't go to museums, we can't go to field trips, we can't go to the library to take out a book. We don't have all the art supplies here that we might otherwise need. And so I started to rethink my frame of mind, and I realized that this isn't even remote learning, this is crisis learning. And so I appreciate the turning on a dime and trying to figure out what the best practices were. And I appreciate that the district is trying to find what those best practices are. And I'm a very critical person by nature. I always try to find the holes in an argument or a plan. And I think that if it's not broken, we don't fix it. But if it is broken, we get stronger when we can identify where the break is, we can understand it, and we can be humble enough to fix it and to help the weakest links in the chain. Otherwise, I think we will not get stronger. And so I'm looking forward to the process going forward, but we still have about 4 weeks of school left. And I think the future is important, but I think that the next few weeks are still important because we still have an obligation to educate our children until the last day of school. And so I'm hoping that all of those involved in evaluating the plan and tweaking the plan will continue to do that so that the kids who either aren't engaging or the parents who are concerned that their kids aren't engaging understand that there's a big ship floating here, but also understand that they are being heard, and that if the complaint goes to the teacher and the teacher isn't taking care of it, hopefully the chain of command will continue until the last day of school. Because I do believe that every day we have left is still a very valuable day for us to learn and also for the children to learn. So I had a question, but my questions were answered, so I thought I would just put that forward. And I look forward to the process in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very well said, Deborah. And I agree with you. I think the learning about the best practices and the consistency that Dr. Hines touched on are going to be so important. I mean, I happen to believe, having spoken to many, 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 many parents who are both happy and upset, that both of perspectives are completely valid. And unlike in regular schooling, it's not a difference of opinion. It's because they're living different experiences for whatever reason, and that we could do a lot of work to make sure that they're all getting the best experience and that we're supporting our teachers too. Does anybody else on the board have a question?
I don't have a question, but I can just would like to say something, Rachel, if possible.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to actually thank everybody for being here. I know that this is time consuming, and I know that you've been dealing with a lot on your plate, and I appreciate all of your efforts. I think what we've discussed today is basically a synopsis of what we've had to deal with this pandemic. And it happened overnight, and we've asked our teaching staff and our administrators to go from in-person educators to remote educators. And I do not think that we can downplay that at all. So I appreciate your efforts. I also appreciate that we are looking for the forward plan, because I think we've done a lot of talking about what went wrong, what could have been better, what should have been better, how, but we've got to move on right now, and we need to move on to what happens in September. And I appreciate that we're going to be looking at the best practices, what worked, what didn't work. I appreciate that we are going to be putting together a committee that represents all of the stakeholders and work on a plan so that we are not left with a scrambling, which wasn't our fault. That's not how we operate. That's not what public school systems are. And that is not the way the Port Washington School District was, because we are a very diverse community in Port Washington, one that we've all embraced and one that we've all welcomed, and why we all live here. So I appreciate the efforts that have gone on trying to get equity and access, and I am hopeful for the plan going forward. I do want to just point something out though. Regina mentioned about not just access, but also bandwidth. So somewhere in our thinking and in our planning, I think it is something that we have to think about. And I appreciated your observations, Regina, when you said that with some teachers, that students sometimes preferred to have the recorded sessions, because then they can get on when the bandwidth was available, versus I have to be on at a certain time and arguing with another family member or whatnot. And even if they all had the devices, who's freezing and who's not freezing at that particular moment, which we have all experienced in our, meetings pretty much all the time. So I think those are all things that I'm grateful that we're thinking about these, and I am hopeful for our future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Larry, you're next.
Okay, I'll be brief. I mean, I totally understand where this is coming from. To me, as an accountant, it's like March 15th, throwing out the old tax law, saying, by the way, there's a new tax law. And by the way, we're not providing you any information you need, figure it out. And then the people wonder why I didn't prepare their taxes properly. So I get it. Our teachers have been trained in how to deal with kids on a person-to-person basis. They know how to look out in the classroom and see who needs a tap on the shoulder, who needs a little encouragement. It's very different. In education college, I don't think there are classes of remote learning that people can take, even if they're, and I'm sure they're not required. So we're asking everybody to do a completely new job. And I think that does take something to do. And as we move forward, I think, of course, people are going to get better at it. Everybody wants to be better at it. And fortunately or unfortunately, remote learning is going to be part of the process going forward for at least a while. And I think we'll end up all the better for it as we support the teachers and what they need to do. And as we support the administrators so that they can all support the children and we can give them the best education possible.
Mike, did you have something to add? Sorry, Dr.
Yeah, real quick. I think about when I first started here in July of last year, and one of the goals of the board was to have this type of connection with the community, right? Either through podcasts or to increase the ability to have this type of technology. And I have to say, right, I would think, thinking of where we were in July to where we are right now, where we're doing this all the time, it's really been an evolution. And at times it hasn't been seamless, but at times it's really been, I think it's pretty incredible. I think we have more community members who are in tune to what's happening, which I think is great. So it's the same thing with the remote learning plan. I think right now we're at a starting point. We know where we are. We know what we want. We know what needs to happen. There'll be a process in place that will enable that to happen, and we will have a diverse set of people on board to make sure that it does. Because at the center of all this is our kids and their learning, which is paramount to everybody here who's part of this conversation. So I just want to say thank you for everybody, to everybody that's been here. And I learned a lot by listening to everybody. And I say that, and I hear a lot of things just like we all do all the time. But to hear the real stories behind what's happening, I think is critically important as we move forward, and we don't forget them. Thank you.
If there's nothing else from the board or any of the educators on the call, I think we should take a look at the community comments. If anybody has any to add, please go ahead and add them now. I'm only going to read the ones that seem like they were intended to be comments for a live meeting. Looks like the first one is from Hank Ratner. He says, so 50% said they were happy with the amount of online instruction. The other 50% were not happy.
I can answer that, Rachel, because that's not the case. No, I think what Dr. Hines said, and if it didn't come out clearly, let me clarify, since I have been working on the results. We received 2,200 responses. So it's approximately 50% of our student population. The other 50% did not answer. So we can't say that they were happy. We can't say that they were not happy. We just know that they did not respond. So that's the clarification. We received basically 2,200 responses. Do the math, it comes out to about 50%. Don't ask me to do the math, of course.
40%. Emily, I'm sorry, about 40%, given that we have 500, so it's about 40.
So
See, told you, don't ask me to do the math.
Just to make sure we're asking the question, so can we clarify the statistic that Dr. Hines said then? It's the entirety of those 2,200 were happy?
No, that's
No.
not what Dr. Hines said either, I believe. And I can give you the actual information.
I think it was that they were challenged.
Emily, if I
So-
understood correctly, so 40% responded, and of the 40%, 50% indicated they were happy, and 50%.
We received, again, so everybody forget my math, we received about 2,200 responses. Of the 2,200 responses, with regard to the question, and again, this is very raw information right now and it has not been broken down, but it's a synopsis. And so of the question, how concerned are you about your child's learning while school is taught remotely? Pretty much everyone is concerned, and rightfully so, correct? Only 6% were not concerned at all. How much of the day is your child participating in remote learning activities from their school? Hold on. The lumped together, almost or most of the day was about 16%. Some or a little of the day was 76%. Most of the people basically said some of the day. So some of the day, most of people replied their children are participating in remote learning activities from school. How challenging has your child found their schoolwork to be? About 69% somewhat challenging, and 18% said extremely or quite challenging. 13% said not at all challenging. So those are just raw information. And when we started to take a look at the comments, that's where Dr. Hines was referring to with regards to the comments, that most of the comments were about having more of a strategic consistency, more consistent, being more structured. Sorry, that was the word I was trying to come up with. More structure. So that was what and again, this is just now. We have to look further and really then try to break it down by grade and whatnot, but this is just an overall number.
And Mrs. Bays, just to clarify for everybody, I mean, this is hot off the presses and you're reading because you've been very involved in it, but an official version,
Correct, that isn't this yet. Right.
Out and be shared with the community. It's just that we have the raw stuff.
Correct, and I shared it with Dr. Hines before this meeting, because it was literally right before this meeting that I was able to get some sort of numbers, so that we could have them in case somebody had a question or whatnot. But yes, we will share it obviously well, and again, I think the most important thing is to share it with the committees, the committee that will be planning for the future. That's the information that they need to be having, because as Dr. Hines said, we need to have all the stakeholders, and this would be a parent perspective with regards to this, to the committee and the stakeholders. So it will be shared. We're transparent here.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Susie B says, will you be addressing special education? I have a feeling that comment was written before Dr. Allen spoke. If you have additional, more specific special education question, feel free to type it in and I'll get to it at the bottom. Lee Heather says, I think this exposes those areas that we have to fix and move forward. This caught everyone by surprise. George Borda says, this reminds me of that song. And I'm sorry, George, I don't know which song because I don't know when you typed that. Ai Yi Dong says, starting May 11th, we are supposed to be getting additional live sessions. I have not seen this happen for either of my kids. When will this actually be implemented and where we see results? So typically, and actually I meant to say this at the beginning, we don't discuss specific issues at a board committee meeting just because we have privacy issues for the teacher and for the children involved. But I would encourage you to follow the chain of command. So if you have spoken to your teacher about this, I would direct it to your building principal from there. And then obviously, if you don't have resolution, you can go up the chain to Dr. Westerfeld and then Dr. Hines. Hank Ratner says, Dr. Hines, are you aware of any school districts that seem to be or actually are ahead of the curve in implementing online learning?
Yeah, so as I think I said before, however it's defined as far as successful, I think it is relative. But I would say the school districts that had a one-on-one initiative, and again, to be clear about a one-on-one initiative means every student has their own technology device, as well as a teacher. You know, if that was in place, I believe those school districts had a lot more ease, and their plans were, depending on who you speak with, probably a little more robust as far as what they were doing. And again, that's probably because it's been happening for years. So do I know of a few? I think there are a few that had, actually I know there are a few who had one-on-one initiatives on Long Island, both in Suffolk and Nassau County, and certainly throughout the state. And those are the ones, you know, it's like everything else, right? You know, we want to look to see where we're successful, again, however we as Port Washington defines a successful plan, and learn from them and see what we can do. And some things we might be able to scale up and use, and some things we may not. But they are around. But I think that is the one common thread for sure.
Rachel, if you don't mind, I am aware that we have a few administrators and Ms. McLean have another meeting. So I would like to just take a moment to thank them again very, very much for their participation and allow them to log off so they can go attend to their next meeting. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for all the hard work that you've been putting in over the past couple months and the months before that and your entire careers. Dr. Westerfeld, are you able to stick around for a couple more questions?
Yes, I have a 4:15. I just texted to try to delay it for a few more minutes, but I have 10 minutes at most.
Okay.
Rachel,
Through these.
I put in the chat, maybe don't read the comments because there were a bunch of comments, but if there's any relevant question that hasn't been answered, because the chat got a little wild at some point.
No, that's a good idea, but there are some really good comments here. And can I ask our technology guru who is on the call if we can make sure that we capture the comments so that we can add them into the record of the meeting at least, and I will forward them to all of the administrators that have been on this call as well, since presumably the community members are reading it. So that said, let's see. So there are some comments about hearing a discussion of the future, but I think that these were probably before we got there. Although obviously people may have more detailed comments. Detailed questions. I don't know that we're going to hit them all today. Hank Ratner says, why doesn't someone contact Eva Moskowitz, the head of the Charter School Success Academy? Actually, more of a comment than a question, even though a question mark at the end. But Hank, we will take that into account. Sorry, everyone. I'm scanning these as I'm sitting here. Okay. Eric Zambrana says, I think live face chats are an even bigger necessity for children with speech language teachers. Can Stephanie Allen speak more to increasing this effort into the summer and beyond? I think that Dr. Allen is one of the administrators who has stepped off the call because she has a 4 o'clock. But I am going to make sure that we forward that question to her. And Eric, if you want to email us at boe@portnet.org, we will make sure we get an answer back to you. I think Adina Schneider says, when will there be a decision about grades for high school students? Dr. Hines, we're here, you wanted to answer that?
Definitely, yeah. So we're hoping to have something before the end of this week. Now, we know it's Thursday, so we're hoping to have something ready to go by tomorrow. If not tomorrow, Monday, the latest.
With that, I guess we will capture the rest of the comments. Does anybody else have any further questions?
I just sort of have a question. Dr. Hines, if you could sort of explain the process into the fourth quarter grading, I think that would be helpful for people to know that it's not just you sitting in your office going, well, I'll get to it tomorrow.
No, if it was only that simple. No, it's and I appreciate you asking, Larry. Yeah, so there's a process in place where we have administrators and we have teachers coming together and thinking about, different ways to make this work. And I think that's incredibly important that they are part of that conversation when it comes to the grading. And so the process is, this committee meets, they send it to me, I review it. If I'm happy with it, that's great. And if not, I kick it back and it's reviewed again. So, where we are right now is we're in the phase of, they're reviewing it and I should be receiving it. Actually, I have received it, but the committee is, I think, meeting even again right now. And I'm hoping that we have this tied up before the, like I said, the end of this week. But there is a process. It's, it's not just me sitting in an ivory tower going, I wonder, if I can make up a grading system. That's not the case. But I will say this too, clearly we are looking at, and we have seen plans that are out there in, not only our neighboring districts, but, in other school districts around Long Island. And so we take that into consideration as well. But there is a process, and I know everyone is anxiously awaiting. Clearly what we want to do is, have the best framework possible with the child at the center of it. And during these times, one of the most important things is to, not hold children harmless, or I should say to harm children during this really, really difficult time. So those are the things that we're working on, and it's nuanced, but there is a process.
Thank you. I think that we may be ready to wrap up here. I just want to remind the members of the public that your administrators are always available to you by email to ask questions about your particular child or your particular experience, as is Dr. Hines and the Board of Education. You are always welcome to email the board at boa@portnet.org, or any of us individually. Our email addresses are all first initial, last name @portnet.org. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. And I look forward to continuing this discussion about remote learning, because I think, unfortunately, we will be discussing it for a little while. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.